Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica with Turn the Page podcast, and today I have a guest that wrote a book which has stayed with me since the minute I put it down.
Thank you so much. My name is Kate Reed Petty, and the novel that you are talking about is called True Story and is out from Viking, just freshly out this August.
It is it is one of those books that I think, even though it was just out in August, and there was an author who recently used the terms in the quarantines, and I'm just going to keep using it because I think it's extremely relevant. But I think from, no matter where you are and when you read this book, whether you're going to come at it later because you heard the podcast or because you've been meaning to pick it up, it's completely relevant. And there's so much in it that says a lot just about society and just, people's stories. So would you like to tell us in your words what the novel is about?
Yeah, of course. I'd be happy to. I always like to start out by saying that it's about men and women and the politics of storytelling. That's sort of my my shortest version of it. It does deal with the issue of sexual assault. It begins with a rumor of a sexual assault at a high school party in the late 90s. And that rumor radiates through the lives of 4 people for the next 15 years. So it starts at a high school and then goes through New York City and a cabin in the woods. And as it switches between different characters' perspectives, all of them are sort of touched by this rumor. None of them kind of knows the full truth. As we look at each character's different perspective, the book also plays with different genres and formats. So there is a section where there's a character kind of haunted by guilt in a cabin in the woods, and it turns into a little bit of a Stephen King homage. There are movie scripts and emails and college application essays in the book. So it kind of kaleidoscopes through all these different formats, kind of mirroring the way that stories about sexual assault and also kind of just any political issue get kind of refracted and pieced together from many different testimonies. And ultimately, the book is questioning, how do we decide which story that people tell about us and that we tell about ourselves? How do we decide what we want to share with the world? And what does that mean in terms of how we evaluate the truth?
I definitely got all of that from it. And, one of the things I will say that stood out immediately, and I was a teenager in the late 90s, so maybe that is why I was so grabbed off the bat from the book. And it takes place, the high school, it's on the East Coast?
That's right. Yeah, it's not a real place, but it draws heavily from my Maryland suburban milieu for sure.
So as a Long Islander in the 90s, as in high school, we also had, these sports teams that were revered, and lacrosse was very big in this area. And I think one thing that I took immediately was that there's so much about toxic masculinity and how teenage boys are socialized to look at themselves, to look at women. I remember thinking to myself, and this isn't really giving anything away because it's the first few pages of the book, oh my God, this is exactly how you don't want to raise your sons to be. There was so much depth to that. How did you come to that part?
Yeah, it's something that's made me angry for a long time. There is definitely a particular kind of, it's a little bit East Coast. I think it's very American, at least in my experience. It is masculine, although it's not, solely dedicated to people with penises, but it is like a sort of our culture's masculine traits. Yeah, that sort of entitlement and privilege has just always made me really angry. And, when I was growing up, I feel like we saw it so sharply and intensely in this area of women's rights and sexual assault that that entitlement definitely spilled out a lot over the control of women's bodies and kind of those kinds of rights. So it came from that kind of frustration. And honestly, starting out that section, I wanted to, I started writing this character, Nick, who's kind of a bystander, and he's one of the main characters of the book. And I started writing Nick, wanting him, he's a little bit dumb and he just doesn't get it. Like, he doesn't see how his own ideas about masculinity are hurting the people around him and also hurting him too.
Yeah.
And so I started out being, I don't want to say I was punishing him, but I had a really critical approach to him. And as that section goes on, though, I was surprised, because Nick is so hurt in ways that he can't see by his own expectations. I did develop a lot of affection for him, and I love Nick and the way that he grows and develops through the book, even though he's always a little bit of a dummy. I love that the things that he comes to learn later on.
Yeah, that was really well done. And there were definitely things that were done to him and done to his underclassmen teammates that, like, looking at it, like, I guess hazing is therefore, like, hazing is assault in so many ways. I've had family members who, and I hope, man, I don't know if he's, if he's listening to this podcast, whatever, I doubt he even knows it exists, but, who, a family member who described his hazing. And I'm like, I don't understand why you would want to be friends with people who would do that to you. But there's this whole attitude of, this is how you get in, this is what was done to them. And it's really crazy.
Yeah. And it's sort of, I always think there's all these things I think of as almost like cheat codes in human psychology. That, people, for some reason, if you traumatize another person, you then often get some kind of control over them, or like buy-in from them, or, people have different kinds of ways of sort of justifying or just learning to live with things that happen to them. And it is so upsetting how often culture and society comes up with these like ritualistic ways to perpetuate that and build that into a sports team culture, or a police force culture, or all these different things. And I think that's it. I think it's sort of one of the great tragedies that I wanted to think about, is how many people who maybe like struggle to empathize with movements for social justice, or sort of struggle to see why any sort of oppressed person would be angry or upset about something, and then at the same time can't see the ways that that same culture has, hurt them or constrained them. It's tragic.
It is really tragic. And so then there's the friendship between Haley, who is one of Nick's childhood friends, and the object of, I guess, his affection, which is jarringly in contrast. I think I've used the word jarring a lot, and I hope that it's not coming off as, but it's appropriate, which is, I will say, okay, which is heavily in contrast with just how he and his teammates view girls in general. On one hand, he goes after Haley because he heard a rumor that she performed something on somebody else, but then he also has like an affection for her, and that was interesting. But Haley is no dummy.
Yeah.
Haley is no dummy, and even though she's flattered by attention, she's also smart enough to sort of know what's up. And then there is Alice, who in the very beginning is just referred to by all of these guys as the private school girl.
Yeah. No, that's true. It is interesting. Alice unfolds through the novel, like she is revealed kind of slowly through the course of the novel, and yet she is also she is as important a character as Nick. She's definitely a driving force in the book, and so it almost feels a little bit of a spoiler to talk about Alice, because she does come in slowly, but it's true, she is the heart of the book. And then I think her friendship with Haley, so they are childhood friends. I think they become friends at the age of 12 and have this kind of I mean, I think a lot of women would recognize their friendships in this relationship. It's complicated, and they fall out of touch for a while in high school, and they get back together, and they have a very intense time together in their 20s in New York City, but there's still jealousy and kind of between, at the heart of this relationship is this long running question of like, how should the story about what happened in high school, or the story about this rumor, how should that story be told? And Haley, I think she's a really interesting character because she kind of builds her life around the fight for women's rights. And it's kind of, and there's a sense that it's driven by this experience in high school. She becomes a documentary filmmaker who is making very, pointed political pieces about rape culture.
Yeah.
And I think, and at the same, and even though her heart is sort of in a righteous place, it really bothers Alice, and Alice doesn't love the way she goes about it. So that debate too, I think, was really important to me, and something I really love hearing readers talk about and what they think that means. Yeah.
And I definitely recognized that type of friendship. I loved that Alice and Haley were into horror movies. I am a fan of horror movies. Oh my God, so much. And I've given like a million shout outs to my unfortunately deceased professor who got me into horror movies, Harris Ross, who taught my my film theory classes. There is so much in a horror movie that it depends on what it is. I mean, I will say, there are some horror movies that are just gory for the sake of being gory, but at the heart, like horror stories and where they come from reveal a lot about just the human condition. So whether it's Bruce Campbell losing his hand in a cabin in the woods, or like something just very like psychological, like the Twilight Zone, horror can come from a lot of places, and it doesn't just have to be body horror. But I do love that Nick was in a cabin in the woods at one point, and Alice and Haley would write little scripts of their horror movies. That was so much fun. It made me feel like I was 12 again, on that verge of adolescence where you and your friends are playing, but you're kind of also not, you're emerging.
No, and horror, I feel like horror is this place, like especially for that, I like that you point out specifically that sort of coming of age period, like sort of puberty, early, like just before high school, because it does feel, and I remember as a kid, like anything scary that I watched felt like a transgression, or felt like I was really growing up or really doing something hard. Like there's sort of a pride and like a willingness to face the real world that horror lets us experience, which I honestly still feel now. Like I still feel like pretty proud of myself at the end of a horror movie. I'm like, yeah, I did it. Like I made it through.
Yes.
But I think, and it's important. I think it's just an interesting space to think about, because it can be so kind of like over the top and kind of campy, like Bruce Campbell, or it can be, really sort of just over the top in the sense of just like horrifying, right? But that, I think that space lets us like process things, or just like we like go into it knowing that we're gonna kind of go to the limit. And I think there's a real freedom in that.
So there's also a lot of characters that are, I don't want to say they're off screen, on screen. Just like they're background characters, but they play roles in the story, one of which plays a major role. And the problem with this part of the interview is that it's going to get too close to spoiling the story. So I don't want to start naming names.
Okay.
But would you like to talk but I think you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe you're talking about there's a teacher who is really important in Alice's life.
Yes, there is a teacher. Yes.
Yeah.
And then there's also another teammate who is friends with Nick.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, so there is one of, Nick's, and this is in the beginning of the section, the most important people in Nick's life, he's got the crush on Haley that you mentioned, but he's also, his lacrosse teammates are sort of vital. And so the rumor that drives the entire book does the perpetrators, the alleged perpetrators behind that rumor. One of them is one of Nick's oldest friends. It's sort of his best guy friend, jealous of and confused by, but is kind of an alpha male on the team. So the two of them, I mean, the book focuses on Nick through a lot of it because I wanted to look at the role of bystanders, and I wanted to kind of reach, especially men, but people who were thinking about sort of Me Too issues, but couldn't really see their role in it. And you know,
Yeah.
like, I'm a good guy, what's my position? So the two sort of like Nick's two friends who are at the heart of the rumor are not really center stage through most of the book. But at the same time, they are in sort of a tragic way, they're the only ones who kind of know the truth of what happened that night, and the full kind of like the question that drives the book, they're the ones who have the answer to it. So they do, yeah, I guess it's not a spoiler to say, like, they do come back and they do play sort of a pivotal role at the end of the book. But yeah, the way that I did that, I guess what's sort of interesting to readers who haven't read the book yet. And I'll say also that I love to talk about the books with readers who have read the book. So if there's like a book club who wants to ask me explicit questions about the spoiler we're talking about, I'd be happy to.
I am a one-woman book club waiting for Kate to stop recording and being like, what was that about?
Exactly. I'm going to tell all the secrets. But yeah, I guess, but for your listeners who haven't read the book, what was important to me was that these sort of perpetrators were like called to task, or like called to sort of give their testimony. Like, they weren't allowed to completely be off page, but I didn't want them to be the focus of the story. I wanted it to be about how do we as a society and we as bystanders decide how to find justice.
It was just wonderful. And I like that there are different covers to the book. Was that a promo, or was that like true? Like, are there 4 different covers to True Story, or 5, I guess?
Yeah. So the UK edition, I can show it to you so you can see, and I can describe it for your listeners. But so the book was published simultaneously in the UK and in the US. And so the US cover is the one you've probably seen, that's sort of a almost like a Bergman-esque with the 2 women's faces really close. And what the UK did something really interesting where they designed 4 different covers for the book to reflect the different genres that we've been talking about. So the actual hardback book, it's like, and I have to, it's so funny how tricky it is. It's like very meta and very difficult to explain, but like, it's basically a book cover with 4 smaller book covers on the cover. So you can see all 4.
Oh, perfect. Excellent. So, because I think that gives a really good look at what I was looking at, because at first I'm like, okay, do I need to collect all of those?
Well, they did, in the UK they did for the advanced reader copies, they printed 4 different versions, so people could sort of choose which one they wanted, which was really fun. But yeah, there is some confusion too. Now people are like, do I have to buy all 4? What do I get? Yeah. But.
I mean, it's a great marketing tactic, because as a collector of things, I would probably want to get all 4.
It is so cool. And actually there is I didn't know about this, but there's a small publisher in the UK called Goldsboro Books, or a bookseller, and they specialize in signed first editions. And for their first editions of True Story, they did the 4 different covers so that people who want their like Stephen King cover, or the Twin Peaks Prom Queen cover, they can choose that one explicitly, or buy all 4, not
Definitely. So I know we're going to be wrapping up soon, but are you working on anything?
I am, yeah. I mean, I'm working on my second novel. It is also like very political and a little bit about gender, but it's more about I guess it's a little bit more of a metaphor for climate change. I've been sort of wrestling with how do we process this changing world, and thinking a lot about inheritance and how we've inherited some things from previous generations, but at a certain point, we also have to face it and can't blame what came before. So I'm working on that. Second novel is horrible. It's so hard to write a second novel, but I'm working on it.
I'm sure it will be wonderful, and I would love to have you back to talk about it when it comes out.
It was my pleasure.
Everybody who's listening, read True Story. If anything, in this interview kind of, gave you a tick that this might be your cup of coffee, cup of tea, cup of whiskey, cup of something. It's really good. It will, as I mentioned earlier, it will stay with you. It will make you think. And I think we all need to do that.
I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, thank you.
So once again, this was Jessica, and our guest was?
I'm Kate Reed Petty.
And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.